Hey guys, welcome back to Tap the Brakes, and today's study will be on Nimrod. So before we get started, please hit the like and subscribe button and share it. Tell your friends and family about this Bible study series. So honestly, there's so many rabbit holes when studying Nimrod. But let's back up just a little bit just to see where he came from. He descended through the lineage of, you know this, Ham. Well, that's trouble already, right? Before we tap the brakes on this one, let's recap a little. Today's study is number 6 in the series, and I hope that you're watching these Bible studies in order, because that will help understanding the story of kind of where we're going. So we first started with number 1, and it was biblical hermeneutics and how to keep the Bible in proper context. We moved on to my theory of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, that there could have been a possible pre-Adamite, and my theory on when Lucifer might have fallen from heaven. Next, we moved into Genesis 3 and what really happened in the garden. We talked about Cain and how evil he was and how his lineage somehow survived the flood and was part of the nations that God wanted dead. Then we discussed the immoral acts of the fallen angels having sex with the daughters of man or women here on earth, and that was all in Genesis 6. That produced the Nephilim, i.e. the giants of the Old Testament. And after that, we swallowed a very, very, very hard pill in understanding what Noah's son Ham did to Noah after the flood, when he saw or uncovered his father's nakedness. Yes, Ham raped his father's wife. Could have been his mother, his stepmother. If you didn't see that, go back and watch that video. But that union produced Canaan. When Noah woke up and realized what Ham done, he cursed Canaan. Canaan became all the Canaanites that God wanted dead in the Old Testament. Last week, we studied these Canaanite nations, and we included some like the Rephaim and the Anakim and the Zamzumims and the Emims, etc., that were here even after the flood. So there were Nephilim on the earth before the flood, Nephilim on the earth after the flood. This offspring of the fallen angels mixed with the Canaanites and even Cain's lineage, the Kenites. We were also introduced last week to some names like Seor the Satyr, and the Edomites, and the Midianites, and the Ammonites, and the Moabites, and for the most part, God wanted all them dead as well. But if you're like me, when you heard the name Moabite, it might have rung a bell, because we've all been told that Ruth was a Moabite. And we know that Ruth was in fact in the lineage of Jesus Christ. But the truth is, Ruth was not a Moabite. She was an Israelite who lived in the land of Moab, and I am going to prove it to you. But that's not for today's study. That's just a cliffhanger to keep you hanging on here. So why not just talk about Ruth today? Well, my channel is designed to stay in chronological order with every story in the Bible. I will not be jumping around from story to story, and for the most part, this is not a topical channel. Like, I'm probably not going to do episodes, I say probably, because you never know, but I'm probably not going to do episodes on, like, what does the Bible say about smoking, or fornication, or political issues, etc. This channel is going to take you step by step through every story of the Bible in chronological order. So that's what we're going to do. With that being said, let's unpack Nimrod, okay? So this is after the flood. We read about Noah. Next, we hear about a man named Nimrod. So we know that from Noah's lineage, we have Adam, who had Seth, who had Enosh, who had Kenan, who had Mahalalel, who had Jared, who had Enoch, who had Methuselah, who had Lamech, who had Noah. Noah, as we know from last week, had Shem, Japheth, and Ham. After the flood happened, which we've already studied, the waters began to subside. We'll skip down to Genesis chapter 8, verse 3. And the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And so the ark rested, as we know, on Mount Ararat in Armenia. To see if the waters were receded, Noah sent forth a raven who never returned. Then he sent forth a dove who could not find rest or land, so the dove returned to Noah. So Noah waited 7 days and sent it out again. This time the dove came back with an olive branch or an olive leaf, and Noah knew that the waters had subsided. So he waited again another 7 days. Sent the dove out again, but when the dove never returned, he knew the waters were subsided enough on the face of the earth. So in verse 16 it says, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. So, the first thing Noah does when he gets off the ark was honor God. Verse 20, it says, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intentions of man's hearts is evil from his youth." Wow. "Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time, harvest, cold, heat, summer, winter, day, and night shall not cease." Next, God established his covenant with Noah. Chapter 9, verse 8, it says, "Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." Next, we have the story which we've already discussed, but Noah planted a vineyard, got drunk, Ham comes in and does whatever with Noah's wife. We already know that story, so we're going to move on. It says, "Now Noah died at 950 years old." Next, we have the breakdown of Noah's kids and his grandkids and all that. So, we know that Ham had Cush, and Cush had Nimrod. And Nimrod built the Tower of Babel. Genesis 10, starting in verse 8. "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, and the land of Shinar." Calneh. "In the land of Shinar." And then it says, "Out of that land went forth Asher, and builded Nineveh, and the city of Rehoboth, and Calneh, and Rezin. Between Nineveh and Calneh, the same is a great city." Then in chapter 11, we learn a little bit more about Babel. So it says in verse 1, "Now the whole earth had one language, and the same words." Let me read that again. "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said one to another, Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top into the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and therefore confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So, Babel in Hebrew is number 894, and it means Babylon, and it means confusion. Babel or Babylon, and it means confusion. So let's talk about Nimrod for just a second. Many theologians believe that the name Nimrod was a title and not his name. Much like Pharaoh and Caesar or emperor or king or queen, it's a title, not his name. Nimrod in Hebrew 5248 means rebellion or valiant. So we read in verse 10 through 12 that Nimrod established Babylon. Again, Babel is Babylon, and Erech, E-R-E-C-H, which is modern-day Iraq. It was famous for their ziggurats and their 9-mile wide walls. 9 miles wide, y'all. Not long, but wide. That's crazy. And Akkad, which is modern-day Sargon, claimed that the Akkadian Empire stretched from the Persian Gulf through modern-day Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, and Syria, possibly even to Lebanon, through the lower part of Asia Minor and the Mediterranean Sea and Cyprus. Wow. It also claimed to reach as far as Crete. And then he built a city named Calneh with the E-H, Hebrew word 3641, and it means the fortress of Anu, A-N-U. Remember that. But today, that's modern-day Syria. And out of that land went forth Asher. Okay, tap the brakes for just a second. Why is the Bible telling us this right here? Well, Asher was the son of Shem. He built 4 cities. One was like the great city of Babylon. During the same time, it said, out of that land meaning Babel, out of that land went forth Asher. Well, Asher built Nineveh, which is modern-day Iraq, and the city of Rehoboth, which is South Africa, present-day Namibia, and Calneh with the A-H, which is modern-day Iraq, maybe different sections of them, and Rezin, it says possible the modern-day Somalia. So Asher built those 4 cities. But let's back up and look at the 3 cities Nimrod did build, which was Erech, Akkad, Calneh. Did you notice Calneh was modern-day Syria? In the Hebrew, it says the fortress of Anu. So, of course, when I clicked on that, the fortress of Anu, I had to tap the brakes. And what is Anu? So, let's look it up. Anu, or An, is the divine personification of the sky supreme God and ancestor of all deities in ancient Mesopotamian religions. Anu was believed to be the supreme source of all authority for the other gods and for all mortal rulers, and he is described as, in one text, as the one who contains the entire universe. Anu's primary role in myths is as the ancestors of the Anunnaki, Anunnaki, which are the fallen angels, by the way. I know you've heard of that. If you ever watched Ancient Aliens, they talk about the Anunnaki all the time. The major deities of the Sumerian religion was the Anunnaki. This primary cult center was the Anu temple in the city of Uruk. But by the Akkadian period, his authority in Uruk had largely been ceded by the goddess Inanna, which is the queen of heaven. Yeah, he ruled until she booted him out, and then she was worshipped as a god or a goddess. Okay, and then there was Nineveh, which I said was founded by Asher, the second son of Shem. The other city that was like Babylon, the great city, an entire study all on its own, which we'll get to. But remember, it was so wicked and evil that God was going to kill everyone in Nineveh in just 40 days unless they repented. So God sent Jonah, remember? Jonah would have rather killed himself by being tossed into the ocean than to go tell these people what God said. They were most evil and most wicked, and we're going to study all about that and what they were doing. But they had an opportunity to repent. Did you ever wonder why? Like, why did they get an opportunity to repent versus like people of Sodom and Gomorrah and all them? God didn't send a prophet into those nations telling them to repent or else. He just killed them. So we're going to get to that. Like I said, I'm not going to jump around. But moving on about Nimrod. Every city Nimrod established or helped establish was exceedingly wicked and evil. There they worshipped pagan gods, built altars of sacrifice, and rebelled against the one true God. In verse 8 it says, he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. right? So let's look up the word began in Hebrew. Began is Hebrew number 2490, and it means to profane, defile, pollute, desecrate, profane ritually or sexually. And it's taken from a root Hebrew word 2470. It says to become weak or to become diseased. Wow. Let's look up the words to be. He began to be, right? To be means to become or come to pass, to come about. Let's look at the word mighty. He began to be a mighty, all right, hunter before the Lord. So mighty in Hebrew means strong. Hebrew word 1368. It means strong and mighty. But the Strong's defines this as a valiant champion or giant. The Strong's translates this as in the same way, a warrior or a giant. So let's look at the word before. Hebrew word 6444. It means presence, because, or against. Before. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Hebrew word for before, 6440, means against. Wowza. eSword is another Bible study tool that I use, and it puts it like this. To turn the face in another direction, to turn back or away from. This verse says that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Well, let's look at what the Targum says. Remember, the Targum is the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew text. It says this about Nimrod. He was powerful in hunting and in wickedness before the Lord. For he was a hunter of the sons of man, and he said to them, Depart from the judgment of the Lord, and adhere to the judgment of Nimrod. Therefore it is said, As Nimrod, the strong one, strong in hunting and in wickedness before the Lord. Wow. So throughout my studies, I'm going to refer to a man named Josephus. He was a first century Jewish historian. Guys, Josephus was born in like 37 AD, and he lived and died through the times right after Jesus was crucified and the disciples were on the earth, and he lived to be an eyewitness to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Romans, and he penned different events. He was a Jewish man. He was a commander-in-chief of a town called Galilee, and when the Romans, long story short, when the Romans took hold of that area, they took him as captive, but he was also an historian. So they used him to be a go-between between the Romans and the Jews. And long story short, he penned a lot of this, his culture, eyewitness stuff that he saw. But this is what Flavius Josephus said about Nimrod. He said, Nimrod is a man who sets his will against that of God and others. He proclaims himself to be a god and to be worshipped by his subjects, sometimes with his wife, Semiramis, who was worshipped as a goddess by his side. Now, I want to look at what the book of Jasher says about Nimrod. But guys, let me reiterate. I'm not saying that the apocryphal texts need to be placed on the same level as our canon that we have. They used to be in our Bible, then they were later removed. I've enjoyed reading each and every book of the Apocrypha, and you can do with it what you want. So sometimes I'm going to refer to those books as we do our studies, but for the most part, I'm going to stay focused on what our canon says. But I do want to look at Jasher, chapter 7, verse 44, and what Jasher says about Nimrod. It says, And Nimrod dwelt in Shinar, and he reigned securely, and he fought with his enemies, and he subdued them, and he prospered in all his battles, and his kingdom became very great. And all nations and tongues heard of his fame, and they gathered themselves to him, and they bowed down to the earth, and they brought him offerings, and he became their Lord and king. And they all dwelt with him in the city of Shinar. And Nimrod reigned in the earth over the sons of Noah, and they were all under his power and counsel. And all the earth was of one language and words of union. But Nimrod did not go in the ways of the Lord, but he was more wicked than all the men that were before him from the days of the flood until these days. And he made gods of wood and stone and bowed down to them. And he rebelled against the Lord and taught all his subjects. And the people of the earth was wicked. And Mardon, his son, was more wicked than his father. And everyone that heard of the acts of Mardon, the son of Nimrod, would say concerning him, from the wicked goes forth wickedness. Therefore it became a proverb in the whole earth, saying, from the wicked goes forth wickedness. And it was current in the words of men from that time to this. So the Encyclopedia Britannica says this about Nimrod. Nimrod, the legendary figure of the book of Genesis. There is some consensus among biblical scholars that the Nimrod mentioned in Genesis is not a reference to an individual, but to an ancient people in Mesopotamia. The description of Nimrod as a mighty hunter before the Lord is an intrusion in the context, but probably derived from some old Babylonian saga. However, no equivalent of that name has yet been found in the Babylonian or the cuneiform records. The character there does certainly resemble a character named Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. So there's that. That's why many theologians believe that Nimrod was not his name. It was just his title and his people. So remember what, let's read Genesis 11 again and unpack this just a little bit. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are as one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they possess to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and therefore confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So Nimrod was clearly a powerful ruler, establishing many of the initial post-flood cities. The name Mighty One connotes a tyrant. He was renowned as a hunter and a protector, and the phrase mighty hunter before the Lord would better read mighty hunter against or in the place of the Lord. This man, as we see further down, set himself up to be a god over his people, and he worked to directly counter that of the will of God. Again, Josephus says, now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an offense and contempt of God. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them under consent and dependence on his power. He also said that he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again. Wow. For that he would build a tower too high for the waters to reach the top. He would avenge himself on God for destroying his forefathers. You see, Nimrod had the spirit of rebellion. That's literally what his name means, just like Lucifer did. Nimrod wanted to lift his kingdom up into the clouds. Nimrod wanted to be worshipped as a god. Nimrod wants to be just like Lucifer. Remember the 5 I wills of Lucifer? Isaiah 14:12 says, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which does weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the midst of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High. You see, this might shock you, but the worship of Lucifer is really the worship of self. I. Let me say that again. True Luciferianism is the worship of self. It's all about you, and you can be like God, or you can even be a god. You can be great, according to them. So be very careful and ask yourself, are you leaving church every Sunday with a sole focus on Christ? Or has it been somehow twisted to now be the focus is you? You are going to be blessed. You are going to the next level. You are getting a promotion. You are getting a new house or a new car. You're moving up because it's all about you. Guys, are you leaving church with a better understanding of who Christ is? Do you even understand the Old Testament and the stories you are reading? Are you leaving with an understanding of who God is, or are you leaving with a mirror pointed right back at you? Because somehow the Bible has now become a story about you. You have the opportunity to make a name for yourself. You should be further along by now. You will be great. Okay, yeah. I definitely squirreled. I get it. But seriously, that is exactly what Nimrod did. He made a name for himself, and he became great and rebelled against God. The same spirit of rebellion is seen throughout the entire lineage of Ham and all of his descendants. Okay, so remember I told you that I read a lot of books. And again, from another Freemason book, it says this: Freemasons believe that Ham was of the dragon lineage of Cain. They praise him as the archon of the dragon bloodline. And after the flood, it was his lineage that brought back all the evil and knowledge of the pre-flood world. And as we see here, Nimrod was the grandson of Ham, and I believe his father, Cush, knew what Noah had cursed and said to Ham's lineage. Remember his descendants? You will be servants unto Shem and Japheth. Remember, that was part of the punishment or the curse proclaimed by Noah because what Ham did to Noah's nakedness, i.e. Noah's wife. Just wondering, but did Cush teach Nimrod that God was against his side of the family? And it was up to Nimrod to save this lineage from forever being servants unto Shem and Japheth. Just wondering. So you see Nimrod, who rose to be the superpower of that region in Shinar. He established an empire centered in Babylon. The Babylonian government set up by Nimrod was a government against God and everything that God stood for. In fact, this generation became so corrupt and wicked that the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 5, calls Babylon the mother of prostitutes and the abomination of all the earth. Yeah, it started with Nimrod. This again reminds me of what Josephus said about another famous leader, according to him, who established an empire leading men into wickedness. Let's read what Josephus said about Cain. In his book, The Antiquities of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 2, it said, Cain did not accept judgment or punishment from God after murdering Abel. Just like I said, maybe possibly Nimrod, Cush's son, Ham's grandson, they did not accept the punishment that Noah proclaimed and gave against Canaan. And he was supposed to be a servant and a slave unto Shem and Japheth. So Josephus says, Cain did not accept judgment or punishment from God for murdering Abel. Cain did not repent, but rather increased his transgressions and wickedness, procuring everything for his own pleasure, even though it obligated him to be hurtful and dangerous to his neighbors. Cain became wealthy through plundering his neighbors with violence and robbing them of all that he could pillage. Cain further urged his followers to do the same. He became a great leader of men, leading them into wickedness. He goes on to say Cain introduced weights and measures into the world where before this introduction to this system, humankind lived innocently and generously. Cain led humans from innocence into cunning craftiness, where all things were weighed and measured. He established boundaries for all the land and established many cities with fortified walls, naming one after his son Enoch. Josephus labels Cain as the father of evil, violence, and corruption before the flood. He even said that even while Adam was alive, it came to pass that the posterity of Cain became exceeding wicked. Everyone successively dying, one after another, more wicked than the former. They were introduced to war and vehement in robberies. And if anyone were slow to murder people, yet was he bold in his reckless behavior, meaning Cain, and acting unjustly and doing injuries for gain. Guys, this is Cain. You know my study on Cain. Go watch The Garden. So this makes perfect sense. Yikes. Sounds a lot like Nimrod to me. Remember, Ham, the father of Nimrod, was alive before the flood as well. Well, he was the grandfather of Nimrod, but he was alive before the flood as well. He knew of this empire and the subjects who worshiped these evil tyrants. Looks like Granddaddy might have taught his grandson Nimrod this empire. The Babylonian Empire was indeed a center of idol worship, and this perversion led to pantheism. The belief that nature and God are in essence the same. Nimrod also established polytheism, which is the worship of many gods. We know this is a fact because we read all about these many gods as we unpack the Old Testament. You know, the nature gods, the fertility gods, the rain gods, the harvest gods, the sun gods, the water gods, the child sacrifice gods, the gods of sex, the gods of war, on and on and on it goes. And it all started with Nimrod after the flood. So I guess Nimrod thought that, it's all okay. Anything's okay as long as you're not worshiping the one true God, right? This is the direct opposite of monotheism, which is the worship of one God. Note, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity are all forms of monotheism. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that all polytheism traces its roots back to Nimrod and the establishment of Babylon. Here's a question for you. Get you thinking. Could Nimrod have been part Nephilim? Or could he have been just a human, but gave way to wicked desires and therefore became an evil dictator? Could he have been possibly maybe possessed by the disembodied spirits of a Nephilim? Okay, all three are definite possibilities concerning Nimrod. We know that he was not a follower of the Lord, and he became evil and exceedingly wicked. And we know that the descendants of Ham mingled with the Nephilim after the flood, so Nimrod, the grandson of Ham, could have been all the above. I'm just saying. Nimrod constructed the first human government where they performed human sacrifices. Yes, we're going to study that too as we go. The people started worshiping Nimrod as a god. Historians alike say that Nimrod's size and strength was like that of the ancient giants. He was a tyrant who ruled and controlled as a dictator. Nimrod was indeed a hero. In their traditions or likeness of that of the Nephilim, remember the heroes of old, the men of renown? From many ancient independent sources, we read that Nimrod was likely the most powerful warrior king since the time of the floods. They say Nimrod was born just 70 years after the flood, and the Tower of Babel was built 110 years after the flood. So that would have put Nimrod at around 40 years old when he constructed this tower. Jewish legend states that after the flood, Shem, Ham, and Japheth appointed leaders over their people. So they put Joachim over Shem's people, Nimrod over Ham's people, and Phinec over Japheth's people. Again, Josephus says that Nimrod changed his government to tyranny, leading the people away from God and into rebellion. The people became exceedingly dependent on Nimrod and his newly found mystical religions. So, speaking of mystical religions, Masonic legends state that Nimrod was in fact a giant. Also, Armenian traditions state that Nimrod was a giant of a man who incited giants. Even early Christian writers such as Augustine Hippo and Isidore Sevel, you have to say it like that, conceded that Nimrod must have been a Nephilim. Wow. So this somewhat mystical legend known as Nimrod has many different forks in the road. Here's a breakdown on polytheism worship of many gods and many cultures that all trace its roots and legends back to Nimrod. Okay, guys, buckle up, buttercup. Tap the brakes. This is the legend, okay? Cush, Nimrod's father, was married to a woman named Semiramis, which is exactly what Josephus said. So, She was Nimrod's mother. Well, she wasn't going to go down in flames because basically she thought that Cush amounted to a bunch of nothing. But her son, Nimrod, however, was this massive ruler and giant of a man. He certainly made a name for himself. So after Cush, Nimrod's father, died, Semiramis does the unthinkable. What do you think she did? Yeah, she married her son. She got pregnant. Yeah. But then it said that Nimrod was hunted down and chopped up into 14 different pieces. Okay? These pieces were shipped to peoples in villages all over the land. But she couldn't find one piece. This one piece that she could not find, can you guess what it was? So let me back up. So Nimrod gets chopped into 14 different pieces. Semiramis, his wife, went and collected all those 14 different pieces and tries to put Nimrod back together. But the one piece that she couldn't find, you want to know what that piece was? Yep, it was his penis. So she then erects what is known today as an obelisk or a phallic symbol, which is really a memory of Nimrod's penis. Go figure. And these obelisks are found and even talked about in the Old Testament in just about every pagan ritual site that we're going to read about. She claims Nimrod, which is also known as Osiris, same person, was resurrected and now represents the sun. He is the sun god known as Ra or Baal. You know, the sun god that's represented by the all-seeing eye with the sun rays behind it? Yeah, kind of like on the back of our dollar bill. She claims that he did not actually die, but he ascended into heaven. Anyways, she claims that it was through the rays of the sun that she became pregnant. Yes, she's claiming a miraculous pregnancy by the sun god. She was then deified as a goddess known as Ishtar or Isis. She was known as the moon goddess, aka Madonna, Diana, Inanna. Remember the temple of Anu, Inanna? The goddess worshipped in Nimrod's city that he built. Wow, this entire landmass could have been the very place that Nimrod constructed temples for the worship of the Anunnaki. Well, she claims that she was a virgin goddess who arrived on earth in an egg, who crashed into the Euphrates River. Whatever. That's why she wanted to be worshipped by bringing her golden eggs to represent fertility in the springtime. This egg is known in pagan cults today as Ishtar's egg. We will get into all that later. With all this being said, it makes perfect sense now. Have you ever seen Lady Gaga's red carpet extravaganza, where she was ushered onto the red carpet in literally a huge egg, claiming she was a goddess? See, Hollywood knows all about this kind of stuff. They truly do worship Lucifer. Anyways, back to the story. She, Semiramis, had a son. You know what the name of that son was? Tammuz. He was supposedly killed by wild pigs and then ascended to the sun, who sits there with his father to watch over and rule the earth, all mankind. So she was left there to be worshipped as a mother goddess, right? Or Mother Nature. You see, the very first prophecy in the Bible, Genesis 3:15, God was talking to the serpent, and he said, I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. See, the woman's seed will strike the head of the serpent. I believe this prophecy was well known to Noah and all of his descendants. It simply states that one day a Savior would be born, a Savior who would arise from the seed of a woman. This seed would strike the head of the serpent in order to save all humanity, right? This son would come from a woman who God chooses. And she would give birth to the one pure seed, the one known as the holy seed, and the Savior of the world. You see, Semiramis believed that if she could convince the world that it was her unborn son was the one who would save the world, She convinced them that it was her who carried the promised seed, the one destined to crush the serpent's head, the one able to remove the curse of death and live forever. Eternal life, immortality was the goal. This claim launched her son into a godlike status. Her unborn child would become just that, the Son of God. Right, little g? And it was easy to do so if Nimrod was already worshipped as a god. It is said, the legend states, that it was, Shem's lineage that cut Nimrod into all of these different pieces and mailed them out so all people could see that he was not a god, certainly not a god to be worshipped. This child that she had, his name was Tammuz. Well, did you know that Tammuz was in the Bible? God shows Ezekiel the temple and who they were really worshiping, and it was Tammuz. Ezekiel 8:14, then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the Lord's house, God's house. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. You see, Tammuz became known as the Son of God. And then in the Old Testament, they began to worship this legendary figure. He was the one that they said was the Son of God, and they were instructed to worship him by weeping and baking cakes, bowing down to this figure. They were told this goddess had a miraculous birth, therefore they started worshiping this figure. Well, they began to worship all these figures, the mother, the child, and the sun god. This is where you get the Madonna portrait from, where you see the mother holding the baby, right? Known as the Son of God. You see this in all cultures everywhere. This is where it originates, y'all. Legend has it, again, that it was Shem's lineage who began to drive this paganistic religion out and force them to go underground, or to do all of this now in secret. But don't let Shem's lineage fool you. They have skeletons in their closets too, and we're going to unpack that. You see, this secret knowledge was then only given to the high priest or priestess of these cults. And based on the story of Nimrod, the mystery religions were created. And these secret societies are known even today. As a matter of fact, these secret societies and cults spring up all across Mesopotamia, Babylon, Egypt, Persia, Greece, and Rome. This is paganism at its core. You see, the Webster's Dictionary defines paganism as spiritual beliefs and practices other than those of Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, the monotheistic religions. With paganism itself, the stories may change, the names may change, but there's always three key figures to this structure. You have the Father God, which is represented as the sun, Ra or Baal. The Mother God, which is also known as the Moon God or the Goddess of Heaven. And then you have the Son of God, which is the Son reborn. These characters also had a wife. Some of these women are known as Ashtaroth, wife of Baal. She is a bare-breasted fertility goddess who in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 5, Solomon builds temples and altars to them. Did you know these names are in our Bible? So 1 Kings 11:5 says, for Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom or Moloch, the abominable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and went not fully after the Lord, as David his father did. Wow. Remember, it all traces its roots back to Nimrod. This was intentional deception to try to discredit the true virgin-birthed Messiah, who was prophesied to be born and would crush the head of the serpent, so that when, not if, but when Jesus came, Satan had already brought so much confusion and disbelief into the world with this pantheon of gods. And in some cultures, there's thousands and thousands of gods and goddesses. You see, this all started right after the flood. There was so much confusion brought in of this pantheon of who's really the true God and who's really the Son of God and who really birthed this child. This whole belief system was only questioned and fought against by the Israelites, who claimed it was them who really was connected to the one true God, who would bring forth the Messiah, the holy seed. So the Bible began with a conflict of the one true God versus the many gods of paganism. And Israel stood by this at first, but they were not faithful to this, as you will see. You see, Lucifer, who is really at the root of all of this, takes on many forms. Lucifer is known in Babylon as Baal, in Egypt was Ra, Greece was Zeus, Rome was Jupiter, Hindu is Indra, and Israel, they knew him as Moloch. You see, Lucifer, or Satan, has both masculine and feminine qualities. We see this in the god or goddess Ashtoreth, and the pagan goat god known as Baphomet. She has breasts and a penis. No surprise there is such a rise of this androgynous push that we see even today. This is nothing new. We will study and you will see for yourself that this push for the blurred identity here of male and female goes back to the times of the Bible. It's in there, y'all. Their ultimate goal is rebellion against God. Many people across the world are deceived thinking that they are worshiping the one true God, when in reality they are worshiping Lucifer, i.e. self. So back to Tammuz. How was he worshipped? The Bible just told us that the women in the temple of God was worshiping Tammuz. You see, every year, worshipers of Tammuz would weep for 40 days leading up to the time of his death and, quote, resurrection. Does that sound familiar? It sounds a lot like Lent. You know, the Catholic tradition that lasts 40 days. They say Lent is a 40-day season of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving that begins on Ash Wednesday and ends sundown on Holy Thursday. It's a period of preparation to celebrate the Lord's resurrection at Easter. Guys, that sounds noble, but this origin of weeping for 40 days was originally for Tammuz. I just showed it to you in the Bible, a pagan sun deity in which God reprimands severely the Israelites for worshiping and whoring after this, quote, God. Again, Ezekiel 8:14. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the Lord's house, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Ezekiel 8 verse 16, and he brought me to the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the brazen altar, were about 25 men with their backs turned towards the temple of the Lord and their faces towards the east, and they were bowing themselves toward the east and worshiping the sun God. Ezekiel 8:18, therefore I will deal in wrath. My eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not hear them. Guys, this was God's chosen people worshiping Ra, the sun god, and Tammuz, the son of God, in his temple. You see, God ended up divorcing Israel because of all of this pagan worship they were doing. And we'll study that as well. But yet the Catholic Church has a practice that is so familiar to this 40-day weeping process. The Catholic Encyclopedia says this: the real aim of Lent is above all else to prepare men for the celebration of the death and the resurrection of Christ. Again, this sounds noble, but the truth is this practice came from ancient Babylonian pagan religions we read about in the Old Testament in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah. You see, after Tammuz died, his mother, Semiramis, began a custom in Babylon called 40 Days of Weeping for Tammuz, just like Ezekiel said, where people were commanded to fast and pray for Tammuz in the underworld. They exchanged one day of pleasure in the life for each year of Tammuz's life. Today, in the Roman Catholic Church, this has been renamed as Lent. These 40 days of fasting would begin on what is called Ash Wednesday in the Catholic Church, and many Protestant churches, with the cross of Tammuz being written in ash on the forehead of the faithful by the priest. They would put a T on the forehead. Many say it's an X and some say it's a cross. The priest would take the ashes and place a mark on the forehead and would recite or declare this little phrase here: created from ashes, and to ashes we shall return. Catholics are told that when they celebrate Lent, that they were commemorating the time when our Messiah fasted and prayed in the wilderness for 40 days and nights. But that is where that we must understand as Bible believers that the Bible never commanded us to do this practice, mimicking an ancient pagan cult of Tammuz for 40 days. I'm going to read to you what Alexander Hislop said in his book, The Two Babylons. He was born in 1807 and was very outspoken, and he was an outspoken opponent about the Catholic Church. He was a minister who wrote many, many books, but in his book he states that the 40 days of Lent was directly borrowed from the worshippers of the Babylonian goddess among the pagans. This Lent seems to have been indispensable preliminary to the great festival, in commemoration to the death and the resurrection of Tammuz, celebrated by alternate weeping and rejoicing. To conciliate the pagans to nominal Christianity, Rome, perusing its usual policy, took measures to get the Christian and the pagan festivals amalgamated. This amalgamation brought into the church the grossest corruption and the rankest of superstitions. There are many pagan practices within the Christian church, and this is just another one. Look, today in many cultures, people make Easter bread or hot cross buns, right? The people do not realize that they are inadvertently offering up cakes to the Queen of Heaven, who is Ishtar. Look how similar this is to what Jeremiah said about baking cakes to their pagan gods. Jeremiah 7:18 says, "Do you not see what they are doing in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather the wood, the fathers kindle the fire, the women knead the dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. They pour out drink offerings to other gods, that they may provoke me to anger." The Encyclopedia Britannica says this: "A period of preparation and fasting likely has been observed before the Easter festivals since the apostolic times, though the practice was not formalized until the first century of the Council of Nicaea in 325. It was introduced by the Catholic Church during the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, when Emperor Constantine officially organized that church as the state religion, and anyone who held a doctrine contrary to the Roman Church was considered an enemy of the state. And then in 360 AD, the Council of Laodicea officially commanded Lent to be observed in the Catholic Church. And anyone who opposed this, or really any edict by the Roman Catholic Church, was then punished. Guys, they were tortured to death. They were burned alive. Some were imprisoned. Just read Fox's Book of Martyrs. So as you can see, it was Constantine and his constituents who merged the pagan religion with Christianity, along with these practices of worship. But it really all goes back to Nimrod and the worship of Tammuz, right? He was the Babylonian Messiah. This is why the church in Rome instituted such pagan practices, first with the deification of the Mother Mary, aka the Mother Goddess, and the weeping for 40 days, the weeping of Tammuz. It was Rome who took these measures in amalgamating or combining Christianity with paganism, and it was the Roman Church who replaced Passover with Easter and moved the pagan festivals of Tammuz to early spring, thus Christianizing. Therefore, Lent moved with it, combining the two religions. You see, in ancient pagan traditions, they would indulge in the worst acts of sin and idolatry possible to get it all in before they would give it all up for Lent and this 40 days of weeping process. This spring festival and practice today is known as, you guessed it, Mardi Gras, or Carnival. This pagan tradition dates back to the ancient pagan spring festivals that technically start just before Lent. Yep, it's celebrated in many countries around the world, mainly those with a large Roman Catholic population. On the day before the religious season of Lent begins, Brazil, Venice, and New Orleans play host to some of the holiday's most famous public festivals, drawing thousands of tourists and revelers each year. Mardi Gras is traditionally celebrated on Fat Tuesday. That is the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday and the start of Lent. In many areas, however, Mardi Gras has evolved into a week long festival. When Christianity arrived in Rome, religious leaders decided to incorporate these popular local traditions in the new faith, an easier task than abolishing them altogether, I guess. As a result, the excess and debauchery of Mardi Gras season became a prelude to Lent, the 40 days of fasting and penance between Ash Wednesday and Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. Along with Christianity, Mardi Gras has spread from Rome to other European countries, including France, Germany, Spain, and England. And unfortunately, many of these rituals or practices spread with it. You see, we have to understand that Lent was never observed by the Israelites of the first century. However, Passover was. And it had nothing to do with the 40 days of weeping leading up to an event. So tap the brakes for just a second. Me saying all of this is not meant to be ugly to any of my Catholic family or friends. I too had to realize that many of my so-called Christian traditions or practices or beliefs were steeped in ancient pagan cults as well. I was steeped, like waist deep, in the New Age religion, and I didn't even know it. But when I began to research, I realized what I thought I believed were Christian practices were actually not biblical at all. You see, ancient paganism has crept into the church, and I didn't even know it because, one, I just trusted the person with a microphone, and two, I really never studied the Word of God to know the difference. I just trusted the person with a microphone in the pulpit. That's what we were taught to do. But once I studied it and saw for myself that this is New Age, the Bible cannot back this up. Things that I was being taught, things that I was participating in was really New Age practices. And it crept into the church, and as soon as I realized it, I repented of that and I turned from it. So this is not meant to be a slam on anyone who's a Catholic or goes to a Catholic church. I just hope that you will research and study for yourself as well. So this pagan worship of Ishtar was complete with the worship of eggs and bunnies to represent spring, fertility, and sexuality that later became adopted by the Romans and formally introduced into Christianity. I mean, seriously, did you ever wonder why, like during Easter, why do we have the Easter eggs and the bunny? I mean, what does that have to do with Jesus, right? I've always wondered that. But like I said, I continued to do those things for many, many, many years, not realizing where it came from. Okay, again, she, the goddess of heaven, is known by Gaia, Ashtaroth, Ishtar, Artemis, Venus, Aphrodite, Semiramis, Nature or Mother Nature, Great Mother, Frigga, Libertaris, Durga, Hathor, Queen of Heaven, Mary, Pandora, Columbia, or Isis. You're going to hear about many of these gods and goddesses as we study the Old Testament. Yes, they are in there, and unfortunately the Israelites mingled with them in their pagan worship and practices, and even in their sexual rituals of human sacrifice as well. The root issue with Nimrod is this. The tower was erected not only to honor the false gods introduced by the Nephilim, but also to memorialize their acts of defiance and rebellion towards the one true God who sent the flood that destroyed most of Nimrod's ancestors. Nelson's Bible Dictionary states that the tower was erected as a symbol for human pride and rebellion. It was an act of self-glorification and a statement of independence, marking the rebirth of the antediluvian epoch of corruption, or epic of corruption, debauchery, and rebellion. Wow. Nimrod's desired to be worshipped as a god in his own right. He wished to create a world government with himself as the absolute dictator, in direct opposite of God. The Tower of Babel was the embodiment of evil and wicked kingdom against God and his chosen people. It symbolized pride, oppression, wealth, luxury, sexual immorality, and idolatry. You see, Nimrod merely tried to recreate that of his ancient ancestors who, I believe, erected the pyramids, the ziggurats, and the megalithic structures of old. once again, God once again stepped down. Sorry, guys, I'm reading, so I want to make sure I don't squirrel. But once again, God stepped in, and this time the people and the languages were dispersed over all the earth. They now fled the land of Shinar, telling the basic same story, but with an obvious, evil, deceptive twist of the one true story of the prophecy in Genesis 3. There will be one born of a woman that will crush the head of the serpent. Satan did all this just to confuse and mislead and ultimately create a pantheon of gods known all over the world today. And yeah, it all started from Nimrod. So we're going to end with that. But guess what, guys? There's a little pop quiz. So if you want to get out a little piece of paper or just answer as we go. Question number 1. Nimrod was from the lineage of Ham. Number 2. Nimrod built what in the land of Shinar? The Tower of Babel. Number 3. Was Nimrod and the Tower of Babel before or after the flood? After. Number 4. What does Babel mean? Confusion. What does Nimrod's name mean? Rebellion. Number 6. Nimrod's size and strength was like that of what? Remember? The giants or the Nephilim. Number 7. Nimrod/Osiris was known or represented by what? The sun. Number 8. What is polytheism? Polytheism. It is the worship of many gods. Number 9. What is pantheism? The worship of nature. And what is monotheism? The worship of one God. So that's it today, and I hope now you see Nimrod in a whole different light. Was he a Nephilim? I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. See you next time.